Great, wonderful. Welcome everyone to week 3. We've been talking a little bit about blood sugars. I did that off the recording just so that people could talk about that. For anyone who's listening in, if you missed last week, what we were doing was getting blood sugar monitors and kind of trying it out, playing with them, and sort of to see what it's like, what our blood sugars are like in the morning, what they're like, an hour to 2 hours after eating. Just to kind of start to get a sense about what our blood sugars are looking like. If you would like to kind of like take the next step on this one, a really great way to get to know your own body is to try out different carbohydrates and test your blood sugar 1 hour. So we talked about 2 hours, but let's do 1 hour after eating those carbohydrates. So, and those carbohydrates, you can play with the ones that you like the most, but the ones that kind of are the most common are potatoes, rice, pasta, bread products, and then you can fill in sort of what your other go-to, and you can even, some people even play about like, white rice versus brown rice. And for some people, it's a very different response that they get for white rice versus brown rice. And this is really applicable even for people who don't have prediabetes or diabetes, just because blood sugar is one of the biggest factors when I really think about how people feel and their energy level and, even depression, anxiety symptoms. Blood sugar plays into all of that. And so really, I think that, working with your blood sugar is actually, a great way to get to know your body and also to improve your general well-being and your energy level and everything like that. Even if you're staying within normal ranges, but you realize that, eating potatoes shoots you up to the top end of the range, whereas, eating brown rice doesn't really do that, or vice versa. It's actually really helpful. Oh, another one, that can be helpful for some people is using fruits. Specifically, I would go with bananas to see how you respond to fruits in terms of your blood sugar. For some people, they don't really respond to fruits in terms of their blood sugar. They don't have a big response. But for other people, that bananas can really shoot their blood sugar up quite a bit because they do contain lots of fructose, which is the fruit sugar. And it does tend to happen that each of our bodies, do respond differently to different types of carbohydrates. And in order to do this as like a real experiment, eating about a cup of each thing to see what happens is a good, even though those are not the normal kind of the normal sort of serving sizes that we recommend, more like half a cup, a quarter cup to half a cup, a quarter cup if you have high blood sugars, a half a cup if, just as a normal type of a serving.
Cup, there's nothing.
Yeah, it's not much at all, but it's kind of like a smidge or a taste, or like a, and really it kind of goes back to that whole thing about how, really a healthy diet is like vegetables, and then everything else is a condiment, including the grains, so really it's, that doesn't apply to things like, vegetables, like even beans or squash or things like that. That just kind of really applies to those grain products, especially processed grain products, and potatoes. They're the whole food that sort of kind of hangs out in that category of simple carbohydrates. Again, for some people, they do fine with potatoes. This really doesn't affect their blood sugar profoundly. Yep, go ahead.
Matter what kind of potatoes?
For some people, it does. We do want to think about sweet potatoes and white potatoes very differently, because people's bodies do respond quite differently to those. Thanks for asking that, because that's an important one to, if you're doing this whole kind of experimentation process, it's, if you really like sweet potatoes and you really like white potatoes, try them separately to see how you respond to each of them.
Is there a difference between the red and the yellow?
Very minor, but for this purposes of this particular test, it's okay to just do any kind of potato and to know that that's your blood sugar response to potatoes in general. So, and that's really about the starches that they contain and everything like that, and how your body particularly responds to each of those starches. So in terms of when we look at blood sugar monitoring, what we're really looking for is, what things make our blood sugar spike, because a lot of times whenever our blood sugar spikes, we're going to have an insulin spike. And whenever we have an insulin spike, we're going to increase our risk of insulin insensitivity. That whole thing about the knocking on the doors, remember the door-to-door salespeople, if they're always knocking on the door, if the insulin is always going around saying, hey, 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 like the cells are going to stop taking up the insulin, and then therefore we're going to have insulin insensitivity, which means that sugar can't jump into the cell, can't feed the cell. And meanwhile, we have lots of sugar going through the bloodstream. So that whole sugar system doesn't work very well once that insulin insensitivity starts to happen. So this is a great way to look at foods and kind of how you respond to foods. If you don't feel like doing this whole experiment with the blood sugar monitor and seeing how you respond to certain carbohydrates, what the general sort of way to approach it is to say, keeping the intake of those simple carbohydrates very low, particularly sort of saving those for times right after a workout, because eating those simple carbohydrates right after a workout does a little bit of a different thing in your body. It's a lot like in that whole image of the door-to-door salespeople. It's like suddenly the people behind the doors are hungrier, so they're going to open the door, even if there's been a lot of door-to-door salespeople, they'll still open that door. And so doing it right after, and also you build glycogen stores, which is a little bit different than sort of it getting deposited into fat tissue. That's a very different sort of metabolic difference there. So saving those simple carbohydrates for after a workout is a good way to sort of, place them well. And then the other thing is really just watching portion sizes. So kind of like I said, if you do have trouble with your blood sugar, keeping that down to about a quarter cup. And supplementing with vegetables. Actually, some of the ways that I found that's really lovely is you can do like a half and half with vegetables. So if you do like a cauliflower rice, but you don't really like the texture that much, you can actually combine half and half cauliflower and regular rice, and you get much more of that texture of the regular rice, but you're not eating that full quantity of the regular rice. And the same thing is true. Actually, I went to a friend's house and she did this. She did the same thing with zucchini noodles. So zucchini noodles on their own can be a little bit slimy. I think they're good, but then they hold like any kind of sauce that you might use. But combining them with the pasta noodles was wonderful because you got that chewy pasta feeling. That's wonderful. That's the thing we all love about pasta. One of the things. Spaghetti squash versus pasta. Thank you, Barb. That's a great one because spaghetti squash is really good for you. It's a very good nutrient dense food. It has a lot more fiber than regular pasta. And again, you can have it just plain, but in terms of use it as a pasta substitute, or you could do that half and half kind of version for people who aren't as keen on just the spaghetti squash. But I love a good spaghetti squash. It's so good, just even with like salt and pepper on it. It's just so good. So fresh and wonderful. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so question. There's a lot of different pastas out there, chickpea and, cauliflower and you name it, it's out there now. How does that affect your blood sugar?
Yep. So all the ones that are vegetable based are going to be lower glycemic index, which means that they come into your bloodstream more slowly as sugar. The chickpea pasta does have a little bit more protein and a little bit more fiber. And anything that has more protein and fiber is going to move into your bloodstream more slowly than something that's a simple carbohydrate alone without any of those other things. Also adding things like tomato sauce or lemon makes it come more slowly into your bloodstream as well. So with a small caveat that some tomato sauce has a bunch of added sugar. It's kind of an interesting thing, like a lot of those things have a lot of sugar in them, so watch out for that. But those other kinds of pastas are great. There used to be this the zoodle or no oodles. You remember those? I haven't seen them around lately, but they were good. I think what my belief is what happened, and this is not based on anything except for what I noticed clinically, is that I wonder if they caused a lot of bloating for people, and that's why they kind of fell by the wayside. They also smell a little funny, so it seems like they have disappeared for that reason. But all of those, and you can even get zucchini noodles pre-made, both in the produce section, but also in the frozen food section. So you can take a zucchini and you do a spiralizer. If you have kids around, they really love to do it. Actually, it's kind of fun. But you can also buy them pre-spiralized because sometimes the extra doing the process it's a little bit time consuming, labor intensive. So if you prefer to just get it, you can get it as well. So another thing to really, if you are interested in doing this kind of experiment to the experimental process. Oh wait, yeah. Is actually to try out different non-caloric sweeteners to see if see what your blood sugar does for those too. For some people, the non-caloric sweeteners, so when I say non-caloric, I mean like the stevia, the aspartame, the sucralose, the xylitol, the all of the sugar alcohols that end in OL, usually erythritol, those ones, or monk fruit, and there's so many of them now, but pretty much all of them, for some people, will cause them to have lower blood sugar levels. And it's a really common thing, actually. And the ways that you know that that's happening is a lot of times you'll feel more hungry, or sort of like even an insatiable hunger afterwards, or you might feel kind of that jittery, sort of spacey feeling afterwards. But almost one of the best ways to tell is to do, I would suggest using a drink that has, there's lots of different drinks that have stevia in them, and there's lots of different drinks that have sugar alcohols. Your response to sugar alcohols probably won't vary very much between them. So that's like sucralose, which is Splenda, and erythritol, and those. A lot of times, it's very similar across the sugar alcohols, but trying stevia, monk fruit, I don't recommend trying aspartame. It's just not good for you, so don't go there. There's actually been studies about diet soda and how it can cause weight gain, but also how it can contribute to, that's very controversial, by the way, is whether or not it can contribute to diabetes. But I will say in the office, what I see is that a lot of times drinking diet soda, what it does is it really habituates someone to very, very sweet flavors. And then that person, it makes it easy for that person to like eat more sweets outside of their diet soda intake. But I do think that for some people, at least, it affects their insulin levels. So the way that non-caloric sweeteners can make your blood sugar go down is that your body reads them as sweet, and so it produces some insulin, and then the insulin takes that sugar and puts it into the cell, and now all of a sudden your blood sugar is really low, and you get this very intense hunger that is a survival level hunger and a sugar craving that's really unstoppable. And so really watching for that. A lot of people do things like for their health that then end up creating this low blood sugar thing that make their cravings go through the roof. Like actually, even there's like a lot of protein powders and things like that. So people are drinking these really great shakes with all these nutrients and really good things happening. And then an hour later, they're like raiding the cupboards because the stevia in the shake made them feel really low blood sugar and really kind of craving that more food. In terms of like the ranges too, we talked about, kind of looking at that fasting level, which means like usually is the first morning, when you first wake up in the morning, looking at that level. And ideally it's under 100. We don't want it to be, some people's comes out as like 70 or below, and that's actually a concern, and we need to kind of work on that. And you can, if that's the case for you, I definitely reach out to me directly, because I want to look at that from a medical perspective. So, or consult your doctor if that's not me. But really, once we're getting over 100, we're thinking about, a person being pre-diabetic. And then once we get over 125, we're really thinking about whether or not a person might have diabetes. And then 2 hours after eating, we want to look at, 100 to 100, really, we want it to be under 140, but 140 to 160 is kind of that pre-diabetic range. And then, over 160 is likely diabetes. And often with diabetes, it will shoot up to like, 300 or more sometimes. And so that's really when that's happening, what we know is that the cells really aren't taking up the insulin. So therefore that sugar is just sort of circulating through and through, because it can't get bridged into that cell. So the cells, so it just stays in the bloodstream, and it can't move out of the bloodstream because the insulin is not working. So really, those are our goals. And if you notice that you're outside of those ranges, you can reach out to me directly, because it's kind of a really, something that we often have to talk through in order to really address that.
Can I ask you a question?
Sometimes it's very simple. People can say, oh, wow, yeah, that's that half a pint of ice cream I ate, or, something like that. Like sometimes we know exactly what's going on. But if there's any question, just really, feel free to contact me directly about that, because there's some complexity there. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. My daughter used to take 2 heaping teaspoons of sugar
Mm-hmm.
in her tea and in her coffee, and then she'd go out and get drinks out there that have a lot of sugar in it. So I got the stevia, like there was a vanilla stevia liquid. Is that okay? Is that safe?
Yeah, for most people, that's great. For most people, that's a really great alternative. Stevia is wonderful, especially the liquid kind. The kind that comes in the powder form is like really processed, and there's some concern about whether there's a little bit of a liver toxicity to that. But the liquid kind is generally really good, especially the kind that just is like basically a stevia extract. Because stevia it's a plant with these leaves that if you can take the leaf off and put it in your mouth, and it's very, very sweet. So basically all it is like a tincture of that plant. When you get the liquid kind, most of the liquid kinds. But the powdered kind that they make, a lot of times they add different additives, but they also, the processing there's some concern about that. So watching for, if you find that you switch to stevia and you're having more of these episodes of feeling really hungry or sort of sugar cravings, like to know that might not be working very well for you. But for a lot of people, stevia is a great alternative. And actually there's some recent studies that weren't the best studies, like the quality. If you look at the research, the quality is not up to par 100%, but it's an interesting sort of concept is that stevia might have some anti-Lyme activity. So to me, it's like, oh wow, that's an extra little benefit there. Around where we live, that's certainly a good thing to have a little bit of extra of that just from our regular foods. So stevia is my favorite of the non-caloric sweeteners. It's my favorite one, as long as people tolerate it well. So I'm saying that even as a person myself, who I can't really tolerate stevia, but from a purely, outcomes, how are people affected by different things, stevia really is the best. And the reason I say that is partially because of the alternatives. Monk fruit does seem to be good as well. I don't have as much of like the data behind that one. It's a newer one, so that's kind of why there's not as much of the data. The sugar alcohols, they have been found, so that's like the sucralose, which is Splenda, and the erythritol and those kinds of things. They have been found to alter the gut flora. So we know very important that those gut bacteria are very important. So that's why I'm not as big of a fan of the sugar alcohols, because we don't want to disrupt that at all.
What about honey and maple syrup? Where does that
Those are great too, but they don't fall into the non-caloric sweetener category because they are caloric. So really, if we're looking at like what are the best other sweeteners, I do like maple syrup is great. And honey is also great. Though people do tend to use less of those when they use them, so that's part of why they're a little bit more beneficial. But also they have more nutrients. And the sugars are more along the fructose lines, which sometimes will digest a little bit differently, but they're not high fructose corn syrup. That's a whole other category and a whole other issue. But but really those ones have more of like the sugars that people tend to do a little bit better with. So and sugary drinks, I think that one of the things that really to highlight here about blood sugar is really about sugary drinks. They lack all of the things that help to balance out sugars. So they don't have any protein. They don't have usually not too much fat, unless you're getting like a Dunkin' Donuts thing with cream and all that stuff. Not to say that that's better, just like to be clear that that's not what I'm advocating for. So really what basically when we think about drinking a sugary drink is it goes into our bloodstream so quickly as sugar that's what really throws off our insulin system. So anytime we have something that just really moves into our bloodstream quickly, it's going to be one of the harder things on our insulin system. So, and a lot of times people think of this as like just about soda, but I do want to sort of point out that it also is about fruit drinks, like fruit juice. Alcoholic beverages also fall into this category, and wine, beer, mixed drinks, things like that, and also coffee drinks. A lot of times people sort of give coffee its own little category. They're like, oh, I drink coffee, but I find that very often coffee is not just coffee. It's coffee plus X, Y, and Z, and it's pretty amazing how much they'll put is how much sugar will be in that coffee, you know. So if you go to, especially if you're getting it from like, a coffee place, they really load it up. It's actually kind of shocking. The other day, they had put something in my drink that accidentally, and I was like, wow, like it's really sweet. And they can have like up to 60 grams of sugars in them, which is like an outrageous amount of sugar to think about drinking in the morning. And then people, what the classic thing that happens is that they have their coffee, at 7 a.m. and then by 9 a.m. they are just like ready for a nap, and that's partially because of this whole blood sugar up and down that's happening. And then they want to have another coffee, so they just sort of, and so a lot of people think about food and they sort of don't think as much about drinks, but that's one to really kind of zero in on. There's actually there's some back and forth about this statistic, but it's a really significant one. It says consuming 1 or more 12-ounce sugary drinks per day increases the risk of diabetes by 26%, which is like
1 or more.
Yeah, 12 ounces too. So a lot of times people are drinking the full bottle of soda, and that's 20 ounces or more. There's 32-ounce ones, or the big Dunkin' Donuts drinks that are much bigger than that. So I think that's an important little piece of information there. And then the diet drinks, like I was saying about how you can still have an insulin response to the diet drinks, and also what we see is both that they make you kind of eat more of other foods, but also that for some people that creates that same kind of blood sugar drop that makes you really crave sugary foods quite a bit more. So diet drinks kind of across the board, there's actually been multiple studies showing that they actually result in weight gain instead of weight loss. And there's various reasons for that, right? One is about food choices after one drinks a diet drink, and another one is really about how that affects the insulin levels. And the more we produce insulin, the more the insulin is a storage one. So it's the one that makes it come, go into the cells, which includes into the fat cells. So it really kind of creates more of the storage sort of a setting. Also too, the chemicals, especially the aspartame and that are in diet drinks are pretty wild chemicals that to be in ingesting. There's like some of them actually were first developed as rat poison. So that tells you a little bit about what they are. So yeah, maybe not the best things.
I've seen some sodas that have stevia for their sweetener.
Yeah, there are more and more of those happening. So yeah, that is, a lot of times it is that processed stevia. So it's still not quite, if people are really soda people and they're trying to work themselves off of soda, I actually there's these things called sweet drops, and they are the less processed form of stevia. And then they have natural, like good, decent flavoring, and so you just put a few drops into some seltzer, and it kind of tastes like soda. So it's a good kind of like middle ground place if people are kind of trying to work off of soda. So that's what I would go with, because they also don't have any of the colors and the, all the other additives and the phosphates and everything like that. So, and you can get those sweet drops off online in a lot of different places. They have like root beer, cola, all kinds of fruit flavors, vanilla. Yeah, they're really good, actually. So any questions about all of that, about blood sugar monitoring or sugary foods, or even kind of like any review questions about anything we've talked about so far? So
these sweet drops, it's okay if you go and get a root beer or Coke, or that doesn't?
What they are is it's a little 2-ounce bottle, and it's a clear liquid, but it just tastes like root beer, it's a stevia sweetened sort of a thing, and it's not, and it's like a little, it's almost like a water flavoring. So if you're a person that tolerates stevia well, that's a great sort of alternative there. Okay. Yeah. So, and then kind of getting into, any other questions there? No. Getting into superfoods for reversing prediabetes and diabetes. Cinnamon, there's a lot of controversy about cinnamon. There's some studies saying that cinnamon really helps to lower blood sugar and improve insulin sensitivity, and there's other studies saying that it doesn't do any of that. I think when I look at the studies, I really think about it being likely due to the quality of the cinnamon that's being used. So there's probably something to be said for that. And also too, it's really, whenever we get into studies of natural medicine, there's a couple of different things to always, if you're reading an article, it's good to look at the bottom. They should cite their primary sources. And I actually I was thinking about doing a whole class about how to tell whether what you're reading online is legit or not. If they cite their primary articles at the bottom, it's great to go to them. And two of the biggest things to look at are, how many people are in the study? Because some of the studies that they use are like 3 people. We can't actually have a study with 3 people in it. Also too, you have to be careful when the study says it has like 50,000 people in it. Sometimes there's actually some fake studies that have kind of cropped up. A lot of times they have like these really big sample size. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. But and then the other thing is looking at, do they talk about the sort of inclusion criteria? So that means like who they have in their study and what they used as the markers for who could be part of the study and who couldn't be part of the study. But also you want to look at whether or not they're specific about where they're sourcing their, if they're using an herb, where they're sourcing it, whether or not it's standardized or like if they're specific about that. If they're not specific about it, a lot of times it means that they're not being very careful about where that herb is coming from. And there's a lot of very low quality products out there that when they do testing on them, they realize that they don't contain what they say that they contain, or they contain, some of that ingredient and a whole lot of, fillers. So it's something that's really important when you're looking at those studies. Also, in general, if you're looking at a page and then at the bottom of the page, they're selling you a supplement, like that article is actually not worth reading, because it's really just like an infomercial for that supplement. And that's how a lot of health information is out in the internet. Like I always say, there's 2 different ways to make money on the internet from talking about health. One is to sell supplements, and the other is to scare enough people that they click on your page, and then you can sell the ads that they look at while you're looking at your page. And yeah, both of them I think have negative health effects on people. Not even just because of the things that they're saying, but because of the time that people spend reading stuff on the internet that is dubious at best. So yeah, so that actually should be a whole other talk, I think, because that's an important thing in our modern world, is how to tell what you're reading, whether it's worth reading or not. So the thing that we definitely know about cinnamon, so there's this controversy, like, does it really help blood sugar or does it not? We don't know for sure, but it might, and it's definitely not going to hurt. But the other thing that we definitely know for sure is that it makes things taste sweeter without having to add sugar. So it's a great sort of way, if you actually, like a really lovely kind of like, after dinner treat dessert kind of thing is just, if you cook some apples with some cinnamon, you don't even have to add sugar. They're really lovely and sweet, and sometimes even just with like a little bit of butter. It's like the apple pie. You don't even have to add the sugar, but it's like the apple pie feeling. And the cinnamon really brings out the sweetness. So you taste the sweetness, but it's not an actual, not added sugar. So that's one great thing that we know for sure about cinnamon, is that makes everything taste sweeter.
Now, there's a cinnamon. Is it Saigon cinnamon or?
Right. There is kind of like, so yeah, that is one place where we're seeing a lot of different kinds of marketing type things. So the other thing to watch out for is when you see a site that's like, our probiotics is the big place where you see this, ours is the only one that's like this, and it's this specific kind, and this is this, and this is why it's so different and special. And usually that's a red flag for someone's trying to sell something for more than it's worth. So I would say that. Really, because especially with something like cinnamon, where you can eat it in quantity, it's like, even if you have something that's like 10 times more potent, you could, and it's in a capsule, it's like, oh, you could easily put a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon in your oatmeal, so you could eat, more of it. And so really, is it worth, $50 for a bottle, they will try to convince you, and they'll say this is the kind of cinnamon that's the only kind of cinnamon that does this thing. And yeah, usually when you go down to those primary sources, it's like underwhelming what you read there, or they're actually showing studies about that herb in general, not about the specific form of that herb that they're hawking there. So yeah, it is classic sales.
Saigon cinnamon at like Home Goods.
Oh yeah. I mean, cinnamon is great. There's lots of different kinds, and really a lot of it is about flavor. Different kinds have very different sort of like levels of flavor to them. If you really like that cinnamon flavor, there's some great ones there. So here we see blueberries come back for another victory lap. Actually, probably blueberries are going to show up in a lot of different things because they really are amazing. They do all the things. Mostly the big thing is they have that, we talked about that antioxidant effects, but also the anthocyanins, they improve insulin function. So that's really that part that makes it blue, and darker blue, and that's why it's a little bit higher in those wild blueberries, because it's really more in the skin than in the insides. There is a really great anthocyanin, what is it, like a syrup kind of a thing, that you can get. It's a and it's made of multiple different blueberries, but it really, and it's a lovely thing for also flavoring water and things like that. It's just called anthocyanin, liquid anthocyanins. Sorry, wait, let me look at that. Because it's just a lovely anthocyanin. Okay, it's natural health fruit anthocyanins, and it's all organic. And it's very lovely. And, if you're looking for something that is like, an alternative to like, sugary beverages and things like that, it's great because it not only is not sugary, but it also gives you some of the nutrients that help insulin sensitivity. So it's a good one there. I think it has gotten pretty expensive recently, but that's partially because berries have gotten so expensive. So I'm not sure what the cost is up to, but it might be cost prohibitive. But you can also take blueberries and just muddle a few of them up, like which just means smushing them up, and then put them in your water, and that actually is really delicious as well. So that's a great way to do it without having, if that liquid has gotten sort of cost prohibitive there. And also, so the antioxidants in blueberries, when we think about diabetes, and sort of why we want extra blueberries for that, diabetes itself causes oxidative damage and causes damage to those small blood vessels. And blueberries are really good at going and fixing that up and cleaning it up. So they kind of counteract some of the damaging effects of the diabetes as well. So blueberries, they're just great in all the ways. So magnesium is also an important nutrient when we're thinking about, there's a lot of nutrients that are important when we're thinking about diabetes, but magnesium is going to be the one that's probably the most important to focus on, because so many people are deficient in magnesium. So there's two things that happen. One is magnesium deficiency causes worse insulin responsiveness, so worse insulin function. So if you're low in magnesium, then you have more trouble with insulin. And then the kicker is that it creates a circle, is that when your blood sugar is high, which is usually most often type 2 diabetes progression, it depletes your magnesium. So here we are, kind of with the issue creating more of the issue. So here you have the higher blood sugars deplete your magnesium, and then the lower magnesium causes more trouble with that insulin function, which causes higher blood sugars, which kind of creates this cycle there. A lot of the symptoms of low magnesium are muscle cramps, anxiety, sometimes palpitations, chocolate cravings, sometimes, and not just muscle cramps or spasms, but also just like muscle tightness or pain, like people having a lot of neck and back pain. Those are the big ones. And the foods that are really high in magnesium are the leafy greens, avocados, whole grains, and beans. Almonds are not on here, but they should be. So definitely kind of zeroing in on magnesium is a good one. I put sauerkraut on here because it does a few things. Glutamine itself, which is a component in sauerkraut, which we talked about a little bit back in Food is Medicine, is really good at reducing sugar cravings also. But the other thing is that those strong flavors are a great way to sort of like almost cleanse your palate in a way. If you're having a lot of cravings and things, it gives you kind of a strong flavor sensation, so you don't feel as drawn to like sugary foods. So if you eat sour, it makes the sweet taste sweeter. So if you're about to eat a meal, you'll sort of feel the sweetness of the meal more, so you won't kind of crave more of the sweets. And interestingly, in Chinese medicine, the sour kind of counteracts the sweet in terms of the sweet being more of a sort of cold and damp kind of thing, and the sour sort of counteracts it. So I always love how many dovetails there are between Chinese medicine and conventional medicine. It always kind of really fun like that. So sauerkraut is a great way to get that strong sour flavor, but also get the glutamine, and both of those together help. Each of them separately, I should say, and then even more together help to reduce sugar cravings. If you don't like sauerkraut, you can achieve a similar goal by eating regular cabbage is great, but also in terms of the sour flavor, just adding a little bit of lemon to your water is a good way to bring in a little bit of that sour flavor. Bitter also does it too. So, drinking your coffee black, having bitter foods that, basically all of those bitter and sour flavors make you taste the sweet more, which is part of why people love to drink coffee while they're eating dessert, is because it really brings out that sweet flavor. And then green tea, there's a big study. So meta-analysis is of, when we look at studies, if you feel like nerding out and reading the primary sources on things, the meta-analysis is the like holy grail of studies. So basically what they do when they do a meta-analysis is they take all of the studies and they compile the data, and they look at the studies, and they actually, make some of them ineligible to be part of the meta-analysis, because if they don't sort of meet the standards of all the carefulness that has to go into doing a study, if they think that the data is not well collected, or if they think that it's too small of a study, or there's something fishy about the way that the study is, or they don't correct for certain things, or sort of show how they made the two groups of people. The meta-analysis, first they go through all the studies, make sure they're legit, but then they also, by making a meta-analysis, all of a sudden now the study is on all of the people of all the studies. So now even if each study only has 100 people in it, now we do a meta-analysis and we're looking at a few thousand people, because we're looking at multiple studies. But all that to say, for green tea, there's a meta-analysis looking at green tea and its effects on blood sugar, and it's very helpful. It helps to reduce the A1C, and it also helps to reduce the fasting insulin levels, and increase insulin sensitivity. So make it more likely that cell is going to open the door to the insulin and allow that sugar to come in, so that your body can regulate the blood sugar better. So green tea is great for metabolism as well. It is another one to watch out for. I'll be right with you. It's another one to watch out for in terms of some people having kind of a, negative effect to it. For some people, it actually, if people, there's a certain, I think it's 10 to 15% of people have this thing called a COMT enzyme mutation, which is this enzyme that codes for the protein that is the enzyme that breaks down epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are like your adrenaline kind of brain neurotransmitters. And for some people who have that mutation, it basically means that they can't break down those things quite as well. So those levels get really high for them. So basically it's like, if you think about it, it's like you have a river and then you put a dam in that river, right? And now that level's gonna rise, right? So if this enzyme slows down, it's the dam in the river, so that the levels rise. For some people who have that mutation, if they drink green tea, it's gonna make those levels rise even more, which means that they're gonna feel a little bit more, potentially more anxious, sometimes shaky, those kinds of things. That level rising will also, if people have palpitations or arrhythmias, will make them worse. So this one was funny because I actually learned it on myself, is that I have a hereditary arrhythmia, and I realized that I was drinking a bunch of green tea and it got a whole lot worse, and didn't correlate those two until later. I realized that every time I drank this one shake, I got that arrhythmia got a lot worse. And then I started to notice that it was, even if there's a small amount of green tea in there, it will do that. And then kind of looking at, and then also looking at that clinically and looking at more and more papers about it, it really, that green tea can, for some people, make those levels go up higher. For a lot of people, it's a fantastic thing to drink, because for most people, it's really wonderful. It has anti-cancer properties. It has, blood sugar lowering properties. And for some people, I guess the next sort of logical question is, how do I know if I have a COMT enzyme mutation? If you have done any kind of like 23andMe or even the what's the one, the genealogy one? There's a genealogy genetic testing. If you've done any of those, you can go to geneticgenie.com and you can put your data through there, and it'll tell you whether you have a COMT enzyme mutation. Again, you're welcome to ask me about that. More on a one-on-one kind of basis for that kind of a question. But all that to say, really, try drinking green tea for a week and see how you feel. I feel like that so many things come down to that, of like, let's try these things. And what's hard about that, about being human and about making any changes related to your health, is that we can never isolate variables, right? We can never change only one thing. It's like, oh, okay, well, this week I'm drinking green tea and like I feel great, but also the sun is out this week and it's springtime and I get to be outside and it's so wonderful. So how do we know, really what the difference is? And so that does get to be pretty tough. And what some people do, and we will have a workshop about this, one way that people start to kind of get a sense of this is by actually just like keeping a little journal about like how they're feeling and what they're eating. And a lot of times that, if you do that for a little while, you get sort of this pattern emerges, like, oh wow, yeah, every time I eat donuts for breakfast, I feel pretty lousy. That was not like rocket science, but but oh wow, you know what? Like every time I'm drinking green tea, I'm saying I'm very anxious that day. So that can be a neat process, and also something that you're welcome to bring into an office visit. And a lot of times people do bring in these kind of like journals that they keep, or even some people make little graphs and things, lots of different ways to do it. And then a lot of times we can look at it together and sort of start to look for patterns. And sometimes it's just as important to say, oh, there isn't a pattern here, versus there is, or really, looking, sometimes what really emerges is there's more of a monthly pattern, even for people who, used to menstruate and are no longer menstruating. There can still be this monthly pattern that follows a hormonal pattern. And so kind of, it's really fascinating to sort of, as soon as you start collecting the data, those patterns emerge or not. And sometimes that just, when they don't emerge, it means we need to be thinking down a different path. So that's, it's always helpful to have more data. So, all right. So any other questions or thoughts? Or
I used to drink a lot of green tea, but then it was almost like it upset my stomach.
Yeah, it does do that for some people. Yeah, definitely. All kinds of teas can really upset people's stomachs, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So I think that kind of in closing this little 3-part session, I think that, the biggest take-home message that I want to put out there is that the progression from normal blood sugars to diabetes is a progression. It's a stepwise progression. So type 1 diabetes is a very whole different thing. So if anyone tells you that, everyone has the type 1 diabetes, it's a whole different treatment plan. It's a whole different approach, because it's an autoimmune process where your body actually attacks your pancreas. So it's like very, very, very different. But type 2 diabetes, which is the most common one, and it used to be called adult diabetes, but now a lot of children have it. So now it's kind of just called type 2. It's a long progression, and also it is possible to reverse it at any stage within that progression. I've seen people who have to use insulin because their diabetes is so severe, get all the way to not having to take medications at all. So it's definitely doable. And also within that process, I always think about how people often think about diabetes as, just sort of almost removed from themselves as like, oh, it's about blood sugars, it's about these numbers, it's about these things. But really, when I think about blood sugar, of anything that affects a person's day-to-day feeling good or feeling not so good, blood sugar is probably one of the biggest factors in that. So when people have nice, even-keeled, stable blood sugars, they tend to feel just generally more well, so that might mean like more, sort of settled, calm, confident, happy, enjoying those kinds of things, peaceful. Whereas, when their blood sugar is up and down and up and down, they might go from feeling really tired and depressed to feeling really anxious to feeling angry to feeling, that term hangry. That's definitely a real experience right there. And so when they have this up and down, it really can also affect them, in terms of their well-being and their emotional state and everything else. So I just as a reminder that it's really about, not just about this big kind of like concept of the disease, it's actually about this, how do we feel day to day? And the more we get those blood sugars into a good place, the more we get to feel better for longer and for more time. None of us really gets to feel great every single day, but that'd be great. but it doesn't quite work like that, but we get to feel better more often for longer. So that's pretty good. All righty. Wonderful to see you all. And thanks so much for coming. And I'm excited. There's an email coming out soon about about the activity calendar coming up. So that's the thing to stay tuned for. And then pretty soon our June calendar is going to come out, which is going to have some more talking about pelvic floors, but also some Chinese medicine talk and a thing about bug repellents, because that's something that I get asked about a lot. But then we never get to in regular office visits. And so yeah, a lot of different things coming up. So wonderful. I hope you all have a good night. Take good care.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.